Your social media posts reveal something about you that you don't even know you're showing. A group of scientists analyzed the text from 2,644 Facebook users and discovered they can predict how psychologically rich your life is. Not how much money you have, but how much your own existence surprises, challenges, and transforms you. And what's most striking is that people with psychologically richer lives share a pattern in their language that simply happy people almost never display, something that changes much of what we thought we knew about well-being. It turns out your words reveal far more than you imagine. There's a question humanity has been asking since it became conscious of itself. A question that seems simple, but hides extraordinary complexity. What does it mean to live well? For decades, psychology attempted to answer it by dividing it into two paths. The first was hedonic well-being, the idea that a good life is, fundamentally, a pleasant life, full of positive emotions and satisfaction. The second was eudaimonic well-being, inherited directly from Aristotle, which proposed that the good life doesn't depend on pleasure, but on purpose, on the meaning you find in what you do. Happiness on one hand, meaning on the other. And for a long time, those two categories seemed sufficient to capture the entire spectrum of what it means to flourish as a human being. But then came a third idea that changed everything. Researchers began to notice there were people whose lives didn't fit neatly into either of those two categories, people who weren't necessarily the happiest nor those who felt the most purpose, but who described their existence as deeply interesting, rich in experiences, full of variety and novelty. People who had lived dramas, transformations, unexpected journeys, radical shifts in perspective. They weren't optimizing pleasure, nor pursuing some grand cosmic meaning. This phenomenon was given a formal name: psychological richness. What's fascinating about this concept is that a substantial minority of people across diverse cultures worldwide, when asked what kind of life they would prefer to live, doesn't choose the happiest life nor the most meaningful one. They choose the most interesting life. And that challenges fundamental assumptions about human nature. Researchers ask themselves a provocative question. If psychological richness is a real and measurable aspect of human well-being, it should leave traces in people's everyday behavior. And in the digital age, one of the most detailed records of everyday behavior is the language we use on social media. Every post you write, every word you choose, every topic you mention is a kind of psychological signature. The researchers worked with a sample of 2,644 Facebook users who had given consent for their posts to be linguistically analyzed. They combined this text data with surveys where participants evaluated their own happiness, their sense of purpose, and their psychological richness. Then they applied natural language processing algorithms to attempt to predict each person's well-being levels based exclusively on what they had written. The results revealed truly unexpected patterns. In the complete model that combined demographic and linguistic data, sense of purpose was the most predictable construct, with a correlation of 0.29. Hedonic happiness followed with 0.27, and psychological richness was the most difficult to predict, with an overall correlation of 0.21. But here comes the study's central finding. When researchers compared models that used only demographic data such as age, gender, income, and education with models that added linguistic features, the only construct where language significantly improved prediction was precisely psychological richness. In other words, your words reveal your psychological richness in ways that your age, salary, and education level alone cannot capture. But for happiness and meaning, knowing who you are demographically was already sufficient to predict you with similar accuracy. This raises a fascinating paradox. Psychological richness is the dimension of well-being most difficult to detect overall, but it's precisely the one where language provides unique and irreplaceable information. The findings about what type of language associates with each form of well-being are equally revealing. The happiest people tended to write about family, celebrations, gratitude, religion, leisure, and travel. Their texts were loaded with positive affect. In contrast, people with lower happiness used more hostile language, more expressions of anxiety, and more grammatical negations. The patterns for eudaimonic well-being were notably similar to those for happiness. This is mainly because both scales are very strongly correlated with each other, with a coefficient of 0.71. But the linguistic profile of psychological richness was genuinely different. People with higher psychological richness wrote about reflection, insight, ideas, concepts, political and social affairs. They mentioned themes of learning, change, and understanding. And here comes something especially counterintuitive. The themes associated with negative affect and anxiety, which predicted lower happiness and lower meaning, predicted higher psychological richness. This suggests that people with psychologically rich lives don't avoid discomfort. They process it, integrate it, convert it into part of a broader and more complex life narrative. What negatively associated with psychological richness is also striking. People who perceived themselves as less psychologically rich tended to write more about conventional entertainment, such as video games, sports, and movies. These same themes positively associated with happiness. What this suggests is that simple pleasure and experiential richness may operate, at least partially, in opposite directions. It's not that one is better than the other. They're simply different dimensions of what it means to live. Now, it's very important to point out the significant limitations of this study, which the authors themselves explicitly detail. First, this is an exploratory study. It was not pre-registered, and it was not designed to test hypotheses deductively. Second, the measurement instrument used, the Good Life Scale, showed poor factorial fit, and the very high correlation between happiness and meaning makes it very difficult to separate both constructs in practice. Third, all the effect sizes described are small. None of these associations are absolute rules. They're statistical tendencies observed at the group level. And finally, all these results correspond exclusively to Facebook, and we don't know if they would replicate on other platforms or in other contexts. That said, these discoveries have implications that go far beyond academic curiosity. We live in an era where governments and international organizations increasingly seek to complement traditional economic indicators with measures of population well-being. Traditional surveys are costly, slow, and limited. If linguistic analysis of social media could monitor different dimensions of well-being in real time, we would have an unprecedented tool to understand how public policies affect not only people's economy, but the very texture of their lives. But perhaps the most profound implication is personal. Every time you write something online, you're leaving a trace of who you are psychologically, not just how happy you feel or the purpose you perceive. You're revealing how open you are to complexity, how much you process your experiences, how much you dare to explore uncomfortable ideas or ambiguous emotional terrain. Your digital language is a mirror of dimensions of your well-being that until very recently we hadn't even named. And that should make us reflect on something fundamental. Perhaps we've spent too much time asking ourselves only if we're happy. Perhaps there's another question, equally valid, that we should ask ourselves. Is my life interesting enough to transform me?